Hi, and welcome to National Museum Scotland. I'm Sarah Rothwell, Curator of Modern Contemporary Design. Over the last few years, I've been researching modernist jewellery that was created between the Nordic states and Britain between 1945 and 1978 as part of the Art for New Collecting Award. And today I'm going to take you around my exhibition and show you some of the highlights of the pieces that I've acquired for National Museum Scotland as part of this research project, and tell you a little bit about the trends and styles that emerged during this period and some of the designers and makers that were working as well. So, mid-century modernism is probably the most known terminology for this period, and the artists, designers and craft makers have found have been internationally celebrated for the pieces that they've been producing. However, within jewellery, this is a subject that hasn't really been researched that much within Britain and the UK. So my research project has been trying to find out how much influence the Nordic states had on Britain, but also those designers and makers that were working within this country that have basically maybe disappeared or been overlooked over a period of time. So the best way I can actually show you what was happening at this period within the two different states of Britain and the Nordic states is by these two pieces. So Scandinavian modernism really emerged and became an international influence within the design world in the post-war period. And designers and makers from the Nordic states were really interested in creating beautiful pieces but within a minimalist stylization that had a functionality, yet evoked beauty, but also were experimenting with the materials that they were working with, and not necessarily using the most kind of fine or revered pieces of metal or semi-precious stone or precious stones. And they were really interested in creating something that was for everybody. It was a democratic ideal of design. However, obviously jewellery is known mostly for the kind of affluent individuals, so there were still manufacturers who were creating these beautiful pieces, but at the same time trying to think about the democratic ideology of it. But in Britain, because of economic hardships and a taxation on luxury goods, our own manufacturing firms were a little bit slower to take on board younger designers who had much more interesting or radical ideals, and were really kind of more interested in concentrating on historical design tropes which they knew they had a market for, and were actually coveting or making pieces for export, for instance. So really you can see from these two talks the kind of simplicity and celebration of the material within the silver talk in correlation to the British gold fine working, almost Rococo Baroque style that was being produced in this late 40s period in Britain. So one of the biggest design trends to emerge during this period is a simplified silver work, and the best exponent of that was Danish designers. And there was manufacturers, for instance, like Jorg Jensen and Hans Hansen, who were really celebrated for the designers that they were working with. These were up-and-coming young designers who were interested in different sources of inspiration, from fine art and archaeology to the natural world, and also the trends that were happening within fashion. Unfortunately, within Britain, we don't see that much, as I just mentioned. However, there were some individuals that were really interested in the impact of Scandinavian design, and also designers from Jorg Jensen like Henning Koppel that were producing really interesting biomorphic forms and shapes. One, for instance, is the suite created by an artist and maker called Anthony Hawksley. And this is quite unique for what was being produced and also sold within Britain, because, as we've seen from the gold piece, this is much more minimal. This is using geometric forms in a simplified use of silver, which sometimes didn't actually have a market value within Britain because we were very conservative we liked our gold work. We weren't as attracted to silver pieces. So this piece is wonderful to actually find and discover, and to actually find out a little bit about Anthony Hawksley, as there is such little written about British designers and makers from this period prior to the new jewellery movement of the 1970s. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a lot written about Hawksley, but he was influenced by Scandinavian design, and he is mostly known for his silver hollowware. But he was actually commissioned by Payne & Sons of Oxford to actually create a series of jewellery pieces, and also was exhibited at the Ewan Phillips Gallery in London, which during the early 1960s really celebrated young emerging jewellers and silversmiths. Now, this piece obviously was far too radical for the British market, because somebody's actually added in little stars to their earrings. So it either didn't sell, or the person who was acquiring it decided they needed it to be a little bit more feminine. So for them, they decided to add in a few stars, whereas on a different marketplace outside of Britain, they probably wouldn't have done that. Another style trope that emerged, as I mentioned, was biomorphism and the use of geometric forms and shapes. And another young designer from Norway that was really celebrating this was Grit Pritz Kittelsen, and she worked for her family's firm J. Tolstrop, and she really went in and tried to work with the silversmiths and goldsmiths at using and radicalising their way of manufacture. So again, due to economic hardships, they were using as much material economically as they could possibly. So they were using silver sheet and cutting it in a way so they could get the most out of that material. And she was making these beautiful biomorphic forms and shapes with simple hand engraving and then over enameling to create colour and also texture. Interestingly, Grit had a Fulbright scholarship, so she went over to the States, and she was really influenced by a lot of modernist art that she saw while she was over there. And she also was in a community of friends that included architects and designers and artists. So she really was surrounded by individuals within her own modernist peer group. What Grit is mostly known for is actually this ring just here, called the domino ring. And it's named after, yes, the gaming piece, but also a very popular song in Norway at the time. And it was known as the teenage ring within the firm Tolstrop, because this was actually created and marketed specifically at this emerging demographic. And it was the first time Norway had actually really targeted that generation. Previously, as with many jewellery manufacturers and companies, they were targeting those individuals with an affluent income that could acquire pieces. So this is quite fun, and actually comes in a range of different colours, and it's adjustable, so you could squeeze it and put it onto your finger, or whichever you want. And this one actually has been worn, because you can tell it's been slightly bent to actually fit onto somebody's finger. Now, natural texturism also was a very interesting style that originated from Finland from the late 1940s within modernist design, and came into Britain, and it was really kind of celebrated and incorporated within lots of product design, but then also within jewellery manufacture as well. And one of the most famous modernist British designers that have found repute over the last 2 decades is Andrew Grimmer. And he came to jewellery in the late 1950s following his marriage, and he started designing pieces for his father-in-law's jewellery company. And he was really interested and fascinated by uncut semi-precious stones, following a salesman entering the firm from South America who brought these beautiful, beautiful stones, and he was wondering how he could capture that. So he worked with the goldsmiths at his father-in-law's jewellers to start creating pieces that celebrated the rawness of these pieces, but also then creating works that incorporated and captured natural life. So he would actually use wax casting techniques to cast twigs and lichen and bark to actually create that rawness and texturization that he desired. But Grimmer was actually one of those elite jewellers within London, and he was creating what we can classify as really the kind of bling end of modernism. So there's a lot of gold work, there's a lot of stones, there's a lot of sparkle. Whereas obviously as the pieces that we saw from the kind of late 40s and 50s, which were from the Nordic states, which were much more pared back, simplified, refined, this is the kind of like bling end of modernism. So, but there were individuals within Britain who were, as Hawksley, influenced by Scandinavian design as well to create a very minimal style. And there were manufacturers and also jewellers who were looking at different designers who could maybe compete to the imports that were coming from Denmark and the rest of the Nordic states. One such was Ernest Blythe, who created the two simplified brooches, as you can see there. These are stylization-wise very reminiscent of what Jorg Jensen and Hans Hansen, the Danish silver manufacturers, were producing. And again, ironically, because of the British marketplace, these are gold plated. You can get them in silver, but again, it's that British kind of sensibility. We like gold. We weren't that attracted to silver at that point. And then you have individuals like the London-based American designer Charles de Temple, who, as was interesting because he really surrounded himself, again like Kittelsen, with fine artists and sculptors of the day, and he really wanted to pair his jewellery alongside his fine art. So he was really kind of creating gold sculptural pieces rather than just pieces for retail and reproduction. And during this stage, because of economic hardships and restrictions on luxury materials, you find a wave of experimental makers and designers who were using gold wire, to actually create these beautiful sculptural living pieces. Now, de Temple classed these as his prickly gems because they have a life of their own. They come alive on the body, and it's actually hinged in a way that it would flow around you and really capture all the light that would be there. Interesting, de Temple is another one of those designers that there's very few written about, but you can find him in certain little places. For instance, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer actually approached him in the 1960s to actually design the ring that George Lazenby's Bond gives to Diana Riggs Vicky within On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Then we go to Sweden, and within Sweden they were celebrating a much more sculptural modernistic style. They were experimenting with pieces that would come alive on the body, and one of the most revered jewellery and silver designers of the period was Sigurd Persson, and he was a very interesting character. He really was interested in taking his jewellery to a much more sculptural formation and designed a series of exhibitions for the Nordinsky compartment store in Stockholm. And these were a series of exhibitions that celebrated the hand, the arm, the neck, and also the ear. And his first exhibition was 70 rings, and these were amazing sculptural formations which stood out upon the hand and were really kind of radical and different from what was being produced in the early 1960s. And this bangle that we can see here is from the 7x7 exhibition that he created around the arm. So these were bangles and bracelets that were really kind of accentuating different parts of the arm than you would normally think. You look at that display and you think potentially it should sit on the wrist. Well, actually it doesn't. It sits along the bone of the arm, so it's actually exemplifying this part of the body, and that's what Sigurd did best. He was creating pieces that would flow along the collarbone or loop around the ear because he wanted to create these really dynamic pieces that celebrated the body in a very unusual and different way. So we mentioned textured naturalism and how these kind of originated from Finland, and it was a movement that happened because from the 1930s onward there was a strong ideology within Finnish design that has been celebrated internationally, and they were looking at the natural environment of the Nordic states but also their local folk history, and those kind of inspirations kind of merged together. And one of the best designers to be known from Finland is Björn Werkström within jewellery. Bjorn actually was trained as a goldsmith in his family's firm and was really inspired by the renowned Finnish jeweller Bertil Garberg to create his work, and he really wanted to align his jewellery with that of his fine art. So Bjorn is a sculptor as well as a designer and jewellery maker. And he actually was approached by a friend who was establishing a firm. This firm was Laponia. Laponia takes its name from Lapland gold, which is a very, very beautiful gold nugget, which creates these beautiful kind of granulation pieces. But Bjorn really was creating pieces at that stage which were far too radical for even the Finnish market. But his friend Attila, who established Laponia, was really confident that actually Bjorn's work had an impact and they would basically find their place within the jewellery sector. And this suite actually was designed and was created for the Bjorn, a jewellery competition in Buenos Aires in 1968, and actually won the Grand Prix that year, bringing international acclaim to Laponia. And it was actually about a decade later that Bjorn actually was approached by Lucasfilms to actually design a piece for their new up-and-coming film Star Wars. Unfortunately, even though Bjorn did design a piece for that film, time ran out, and so they had to actually go to the Laponia store in London and actually purchase a piece from the stock range. So Lucasfilms actually acquired the Planetoid Valleys necklace and the Zelda bracelet that you can see Carrie Fisher wearing right at the end of New Hope. So to end this quick tour of the exhibition, I'd like to introduce you to the Scottish artist Dorothy Hogg. Dorothy was at the Royal College of Art in the late 1960s, and when I spoke to Dorothy, she really said that her kind of inspiration was modernism as an artistic trope. She wasn't really kind of trying to take on any of the trends that were happening at that stage. In actual effect, she probably was reacting to the individuals such as Andrew Grimmer and Charles de Temple, who were the known faces of jewellery at that time, and actually wanted to create something much more pared back, much more minimal, that was actually celebrating the materiality that she was working with. So this wonderful neck piece is from a period of experimentation that Dorothy was looking at during her time at the Royal College of Art, and it's actually a wonderful, beautiful articulated neck piece that celebrates the curves of the body and actually has a small piece of labradorite just kind of enclosed in it as well. So, thank you very much for taking this little tour with me, and I hope you'll be able to come and see the exhibition in full. It runs to the 15th of July, so I hope you enjoyed it.